computer. Okay, so here we are giving the update for July 22nd. As usual, these links will be in the description of the video, and we're going to go over some stuff that has happened in the last 7 days. So we have the non-Rust and Rust column, which will be under done, and then we're going to go over what is still in progress after that. So a couple of things to cover. Serhi has been setting up one of our libraries. It's pretty important. It's used by the current CLI and obviously front end things. We had some issues where we were concerned about some dependencies that may eventually try to become like malicious or something like that. So we have set up this danger setup, which is great. It'll tell us very helpful things to keep us as safe as possible. It's funny because, you know, if you're not really familiar with those supply chain attacks, this happens quite a bit. And this morning I opened up my phone and there was a link, I guess this is actually from yesterday, but about another recent supply chain attack from an NPM package. So this is what we are aiming to address. So thank you for that. And then, yes, very important, we have this published publicly on the governance forum. So the governance forum is gov.near.org. And here is something that we would love the community to all dig into. This is the proposal for how the CLI should be. Now, this doesn't have any opinion on like programming language, anything. This is just like, what should this thing do? What is the identity of the CLI? And so we invite everyone to, you know, create an account for free and have some ideas in the comments below. So thank you for doing this. I know this was an awesome lift from Serhi and Josh Quintel, who is not here today. This link will also be there in the description. And let's see, so also in non-Rust land, Chad has moved forward a couple of near enhancement proposal fixes. That's what we call NEPs for token standards that really needed attention. We have so much great stuff going on that sometimes things get a little bit stale, and there were some great fixes to the token standards that came in. So thank you for that, Chad. One big topic that we are doing for this quarter as the dev platform team is the idea of the sandbox. And I said this last week, but I'll say it again. We will be deprecating simulation tests. I don't think that there's any reason why we should pull the crate or anything. So this is not like going to get yanked out from under anyone, but in an effort to really have tests that can do more complex things than unit tests, like testing cross-contract calls and, you know, balance transfers and things like that. We have finally come around to the fact that actually it needs to be much more similar to the true near core repo, which runs the node. And so if you haven't been keeping up to date on this, there is some documentation about this currently published in docs.near.org. If you go under develop, smart contracts, test, and sandbox. So this is a little bit of repetition in case you hadn't seen this before, but essentially you can get to the near core repository and do make sandbox. This is a new entry in the make file where you may be familiar with this, where make release would make a release of the full node. So this is actually a much smaller binary. And so we are trying to figure out how the best way to use this sandbox binary for testing. So this is a major lift from the whole team. And speaking of that,
actually, Mike, I don't think it's a smaller binary. It's pretty much the same binary.
Is that right?
Yes, it's well, if anything, it actually has a little bit more stuff. But yeah,
it was like 28 megs.
Something, yeah, something like this.
Okay, I was under the impression that
sandbox is essentially a node. It's not different from a node. It just has a few additional things.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that. I thought it was actually a lot smaller. Maybe that was just a false assumption. Thanks there, Bowen. So yes, as I should mention too, like this is a page definitely worth checking out. This is also kind of like we're rapidly showing the community how they can start playing with the sandbox. And this is not as ironed out as we want it to be eventually. So now we get to figure out the best way to do the UX of the sandbox testing. Part of that is in this repo, which I have linked to here. And this is in very early stages, but this is something Willem worked on, basically allowing us to grab the sandbox using JavaScript, grab the binary using JavaScript. And this is going to, this part of this repo is going to let it so we can have JavaScript-like tests, or sorry, jest-like tests running. So keep an eye on this repo if you are curious about this and want to be on the cutting edge of this. In Rustland, there's too much to even mention, but there's like a ton of pull requests coming in to address all the issues that we would like to have before the next major release. And a number of them are captured in this link, but then also there are a few more. And so I think we're targeting this for pretty darn soon. And actually, Austin, since you're on the call, do you think this is probably like before Tuesday or on Tuesday, or if not earlier?
Oh yeah, I can't see how it would take longer than like a couple of days. I mean, the only PRs that are still to come in this release are already reviewed. They just need to come in. So I could even have the release out by the end of the day today, but I might give it, a day or two just to make sure that, if anyone has any input or anything they want added in or removed from the release, then we can do that.
So
Awesome.
how much size reduction do we get from this?
This one wasn't really targeting size reduction. It was more like a cleanup of the APIs, but there is some size reduction. Like it's hard to really say because I haven't actually given a metric of with everything included what it looks like on most core contracts. But there's like the two parts, which is just like the changes in the code, which reduce the code size, which seem to be about maybe like 20% or something like that in some cases. And then also the like removal of rlib, which is completely independent of the SDK release. It's just like on the individual crates that also reduces a decent amount too. I don't have like specific numbers because it really depends on the crate. But yeah, this release is not targeting contract size reduction as much. That's going to primarily be targeted after.
I see. Oh, maybe I should look at the next item on what Mike showed on his screen.
Oh yeah. Right. Actually, yeah, and yeah, this is a fun update. So moving right onto that one, we had a meeting with Ilya, Austin, myself, and Fong to talk about the contract size reduction. Because a little bit of context, we had been talking about this for a couple of months about the no STD approach, which will like reduce contract sizes. We believed, and a few folks, including Eugene, sort of dove into that, and we expected a pretty reasonable contract size reduction. And during that process, discovered that there are a few other culprits that are non-trivial. Serde, which is the JSON serialization, was one of them. And then this is something I can't explain very great, but like essentially strings and UTF-8 were a big deal in terms of loading contract size. And so we had this great meeting with Ilya. Here are some notes I think I would love to go over with folks. Yeah, overall, we had this goal of like no STD mode, and confirmed that like, is there any other reason besides contract size reduction? And no, actually, this is really like what we want to be targeting here. And there are some smart contracts that if you really need to be as efficient as possible in terms of size, you can do a more low-level approach. And I'll just give a sneak peek here. This may look a little bit scary because it is scary, but essentially you will be reading and writing from registers. This is one example. We can have it linked here. There's also an entire video actually that Eugene made in the live contract review about a low-level fungible token that's written in this manner. So this is particularly useful for people who may have like a smart contract that you're going to be deploying with a factory like many times, or basically a contract that's going to be used many times. So this is like quite a lift and a little bit of engineering wise when you're a smart contract developer, but it can be extremely useful. For instance, Multi-sig could be way smaller. Ilya muses that this could go down to like 50 KB if we use this method. Mintbase is this awesome NFT platform that uses a factory for each person to be able to truly own their store. And this is the one that we just looked at. And of course, Sputnik DAO, which is this amazing DAO that's on Near. And if you haven't been there, it's sputnik.fund. And these also, when you create your own DAO, these are factories. So these are examples of things that would really benefit from this. Some things that we learned from this meeting. Using Derive generates a good amount of code. This is something that I think that advanced Rust developers understand, but also learned firsthand from and shared by Ilya. Formatting is a big deal. And then this one is quite interesting. I didn't really think about, but you having assertions in your Rust. And feel free to jump in and fill in the rest of this. But I believe Ilya said, like, because when you use assertions, it will have to remember the line of code where this thing happened. That somehow does a lot of like bloat to the contract size. So, TLDR, I suppose, is like a hyper reduced contract may want to remove assertions. So take this as
you might want to
guidance.
reword that. Like you can also just like replace it with like calling the panic syscall with like a custom assertion message, because like using the traditional Rust assertions will include that like error message inside of the binary. But if you use like the example of the panic syscall or through like an mpanic, you don't have all that extra bloat. So that is like a kind of middle way solution.
So yeah. So like, but in terms of this means like using the assert macros is something to avoid. Is that a better way of saying this?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I will correct that. And then we did go over the fact that Serde is a JSON serialization that we're using, and Aurora, which everyone probably knows from, I think it's aurora.dev, ran into a lot of issues in terms of like really wanting to reduce and make it as efficient everything, since the EVM is actually a smart contract, which is amazing. It's a whole other topic, but we were able to learn from some findings from Aurora, and they realized that Serde was also a problem, and they went with this RJSON crate, which is much smaller. Austin also mentioned that there's a mini Serde crate. This is a little bit funny. If you look at the crate here, data structure serialization library with several opposite design goals from Serde. So this is something that we can look at too as we want to improve or reduce contract size. And then this is something that Austin just mentioned, but it seems as though we've been using rlib as the type of library for quite a while, and we don't really need to be doing that, and it reduced size a good amount. Actually, where is this? But essentially, I'll just take a random example here. We have been putting this in the manifest. Well, this is like the workspace.
It'd be on the actual contract, yeah.
So yes, so right here is something that, Austin was just looking at some base assumptions, like, do we really need this? The answer is, it doesn't really seem to be any special reason why we need this. And as there is a commit that I don't have easily available, but when this was removed from the Near SDK RS examples, there was like a reduction of like around 58 KB, 60 KB from them. So that's actually a great win in and of itself. It's a good find. Anything else that anyone wants to add before we move on? Cool. Yes, and Chad is back, and that is awesome. And I forgot to mention that he was back last week, and I apologize for that. I didn't have you in the last week's update. And so this is something that's been a really burning need, is like, how the heck do you upgrade your smart contract? And this is going to really fit into a couple of targets for this team generally. And so this is a piece of the SDK docs that he's been working on. Here we go. This is a transient link. This will go away once the PR is merged. But yes, on the left-hand side here, we see there is a whole item on the sidebar for upgrading contracts. And this is all DocuSars 2, which is like really great. And Chad has added some really nice things like a little refresher here on like what is the difference that you would want to see between update and migration and how to do rapid prototyping. So this is very important. I feel like this has been needed for so long. So this is not quite merged yet, but this is coming along, and people can finally have a good idea of how to do this. I think before we have been pointing folks to examples of how upgrades have happened in Rust smart contracts, but this is like finally getting into documentation. So that's very exciting. And yes, Phong is working on essentially the sandbox, working purely in Rust. As I showed from the end-to-end tests that we have in our documentation, that's just purely using near API.js. Certainly, if you're writing a Rust smart contract, you don't want or need to have JavaScript dependencies. So this is going to be either writing Rust or kind of borrowing some logic that exists in a Rust CLI that is a sort of community project from Frol and some folks besides Frol. So this is going to be great. The idea here is, if you're familiar with simulation tests, when you wrote a smart contract, you have the convention really is to put the simulation tests in the tests/sim directory. And so this is going to be really similar with sandbox tests. It's going to be in tests/sandbox. And so this is an effort to basically get that going. We have an entire epic around this, which I will show right here. The epic is sandbox. This is all publicly available, and I've created some basic, like 5 basic tasks that we can use as sort of baby steps. This is all aiming toward a really simple proof of concept of this is going to be the Rust counter example, where we're going to have a simulation test that runs in there. And, obviously we want to have Sandbox do everything that simulation tests can do and more, including patch state. So kind of a fun thing that is going to be different, a little bit different about this from simulation tests, for instance, is, we will deploy the code, run the increment function, and then we will patch state so that state is now a different number, call increment again, and make sure that it's a little bit higher. This is still very like hello world, but this is what we're aiming towards. So sandbox testing is coming along. Yes, and then lastly, this is like a sort of a small issue, but like a major quality of life for anyone who's used the CLI. Phong and I think Serhi are kind of working on this in the comments, that our CLI hasn't been able to take Yocto as a deposit amount, which can be quite annoying. If you say, hey, I know that I need to pay this amount of storage in Yocto, and you have to constantly like translate that to what that is in Near. It's not like that difficult, but the repetition and the grindiness of it all is not great. So we're adding that as an actual flag. So you'll be able to say, instead of amount, you can say amount Yocto. Sorry, deposit. Instead of saying deposit Yocto. So that will be a nice little quality of life for anyone who's run into that. I think that is it. It's actually quite a bit for a week of work. And we will have Jim and Josh Quintel back from ETHCC and vacation next week. And I might not be running these meetings anymore. But yeah, this has been a lot of great stuff happening this week.